You're listening to The Intellectual Investor, episode number 124, Vitaliy's Talk with Indiana University Students, Part 2. To learn more about Vitaliy's investing firm, IMA, go to imausa.com. Vitaliy's Talk with Indiana University Students, Part 2. In Part 2 of Vitaliy's Talk with Indiana University Students, he discusses what he got right and what he got wrong when investing through the pandemic. He also touches on how recessions can be good for businesses, compounding small advantages, and whether or not to envy someone else's success. Enjoy.
All right, so one of our MSF students, Brooke Bailey, was listening to a Q&A call that you did a year ago, just as the pandemic was ramping up, and you said then that you wanted to focus on things that would not change as opposed to things that would. So, we're here a year later, and so she wanted to ask kind of how has this played out? What would you have done differently, or what did you kind of learn from that process?
Wow, what a great question. Let me think. God, there were so many things. I was so wrong on so many different things. I was so wrong on the response of our government, our government response, because I was I was basically at the time thinking that we have a superior system to Chinese government, and we would do so much better job than they did. And my God, I was so wrong about this. And I don't know if this is our government, if that's a chronic issue or if it was just administration at the time. So I don't know the answer to that. The one thing at the time I was thinking that at the end of the day, capitalism will win, and ingenuity of our companies will shine. And I think that's turned out to be true, when it comes to vaccines and etc. I did not nobody expected that you're gonna have 5 million people die. You're gonna borrow all this, we're gonna go through all this hell we went through, and the market will be making new highs. So, in fact, you would argue that if we did not, just think about this. I wanted to look back in January 2020, and let's say there was no pandemic, and fast forward a year. Where do you think the market would be? I would argue, and again, I can't prove it to you, it would be lower than it is today. I want you to think about this for a second. I don't want to sound, I'm talking about people live, this, obviously there was a huge amount of human toll, people died. But from a corporate perspective, this was a net there was some positives for the economy. And here's why. When the economy is growing for a long period of time, it's anything that hasn't been stressed for a while gets develops some fat inefficiencies, right? Because when you're going to be a lot when you're going to be in a very hospitable environment, you're probably not going to be as fit when you've been subjected to stress. Right. So the reason you have expansions and then you have recessions, because recessions come in and they clear out, clear out all the fat, you become fit again, and then growth resumes. So the pandemic, when pandemic came, we were in the year 10 of economic expansion. So a lot of companies had basically got lazy. They had a lot of fat, and the pandemic gave them an excuse and a stimuli to basically cut the expenses tremendously. Like Uber laid off 1/4 of their workforce. Like, and obviously they had to do it at the time, but if the pandemic did not happen, there is no way they would have the inside the company they would be able to do this, right? Because if your business is doing fine and you come in and say, I'm going to lay off 1/4 of the workforce, it's going to destroy the culture. When you're doing this during the pandemic, I think people accept it much better. Like the acceptance from workers, at least people understand why you're doing it. So a lot of companies, what they did, they basically cut out a lot of fat. So the reason the market is where it is today, because now you look at the market, now these companies, at some point, their revenues will come back to, a lot of companies already have come back to pre-pandemic level, but their costs are lower.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you have higher margins. The downside of that is that lower costs means you have higher employment. So I don't know how to, so you have positive and negative, and you have haves and not, and not haves. So you have to, so this is something I'm still trying to reconcile. But to answer your core question, really, what has not changed? Probably one thing, like if I'm really critical myself, I should have spent more time thinking about what will change the digitization and paying more attention to that, because there were some companies that I understood the businesses and I understood the impact the pandemic has on them, and I just did not react. It's just, and maybe it was a shock, whatever. Like there was a company that I spent a tremendous amount of time on, DocuSign. And I looked at him and, I'm like, I get, like they like, no matter what happens, they brought the future forward, right? That's not, once pandemic is over, we're not going to go back to signing things on paper anymore. It's not going to come back. It's once you go DocuSign, you don't go, you don't go back. That should be their slogan, by the way. But I completely missed it. So those were my missions, and there were plenty of them. But at the same time, I think we stuck to companies that the difficulty to answer this question is, and this is a very important point. It only took 1 year or less for us to get vaccines. That is, like now it's, for us, it's obvious. Well, it's, 9 months later, we got a vaccine. Well, it was anything but obvious then, right? And if we got a vaccine 2 years later, then the way things would have played out would have been very different too. So I was creating the portfolio for that scenario. And so we still done very well, but I would have done much better if I positioned for the portfolio for vaccine in 9 months. And I think that's important to understand, is that that what has had, what on one side, our response was much worse. On the other side, the vaccines really have changed things tremendously.
Right.
So, what I learned from this, like, I don't even know, like, I don't even know what to learn. I'm probably going to learn something, but I'm not even sure what to learn from this. So, yeah.
Well, it seemed like a lot of the students were intrigued by some of your articles, or your article on the Fisher random chess
Yes.
analogy. And so one of the questions, I guess Mackenzie Evans, one of our MBAs, had read an article in Bloomberg a number of years ago that a lot of Wall Street individuals had tried to learn chess because they thought that would be a skill that would translate and so forth. So given your background from Russia, where chess is a bigger deal in the U.S., have you seen any kind of correlation between that, or do you think that theory doesn't really hold water?
There's a lot of so this is a very good question. There is a movie, Searching for Bobby Fischer, and I forget the guy's name, but there's a it's based on a true story, and there was a guy there who was his who was a teacher, and he's a he had an interview maybe 15, 20 years ago. He said something about chess that stuck with me. Chess is a game of small advantages. I want you to think about it for a second. This is very important. When you start the game, you basically, everything is the same. Like you have identical position. And then with every move, you are either creating a small advantage or you subtract, or you do nothing or you subtract it. And at the end of the day, like when you go into mid-game, then at that point, you already made, 10, 15 moves. And a lot of these little moves start to add up. Like your bishop's a position that they're shooting through the whole board. Your rook's a position, so they're shooting through the open file. Your king is a little bit more secure. Your knight covers more squares in the middle of the board. And so suddenly all these advantages add up, and suddenly maybe your king is a little bit more protected, and therefore you're attacking his king, and you don't have to worry about your king. So if you have companies, number one, this applies to me as a businessman running IMA. Like I try to constantly to improve us, just to give us a little bit more advantages, us to provide a little bit better customer service to clients, do a little bit better research. All this little, because these little things add up over time. But also looking at companies that constantly improve a little bit, all the time. So that's point number one. I think what chess is, it's basically an intense thinking. That's what it is. It's an intense and almost uninterrupted thinking. It's, to me, the another analogy for chess would be writing, except my opponent, this chess is in chess, lately happened to be my daughter. I play a lot with my daughter, but when I write, my opponent is a white screen, is a blank screen. So, but it's a concentrated thinking. And therefore, if you think about it, like we spend a lot, if you think about our health, going to the gym, etc., because we want to work out our muscles. But brain is muscle too, and chess to me, it's just, it doesn't have to, that analogy doesn't have to necessarily go to investing. It's just via just exercising our muscle, our thinking muscle. But the Fisher random chess analogy, I think, was one of probably the best analogies I ever come up with for that environment, right? Because, and guys, if you haven't read that article, I'm not going to regurgitate it here just to save time, but read it. It's and it's going to make more sense, because that analogy allowed me to figure out what to do. Allowed me to erase, basically, reset all my assumptions. And say, okay, if I knew nothing about, if I didn't look at history, if I tried to stop looking for patterns, not look at history, how would it be looking at my portfolio? What could happen? This kind of thing. So I'm not really answering the question completely, because but here's the interesting part. If you gave me this question and I sat in front of a computer for 5 hours, I would have given you such a great response, just because, and that's because at that point I would go through all the different versions of my thinking, right, and throw out a bunch of extra things and left 5 things, whatever. So, but that's the beauty of writing, by the way. I'm gonna diverge for a second. The most important thing that happened to me as a human being, I'm not talking about having kids or being married, aside from all that stuff, writing. I write about 1 or 2 hours a day, every single day. And that is, writing is focused thinking. Okay? So if you write, you don't have to publish it. just write it for yourself, write a journal. But writing focuses you. It's the most focused thinking you could possibly do. So I highly recommend you guys do that.
Is there anything that you've learned from the pandemic that's caused you to change any part of your process or philosophy?
My immediate response probably would be no. But I reserve a right to change my mind because I don't know. As of right now, not really.
Okay. What so William Mucci, one of our MBAs, said, it seems like one of the hardest things to do in investing is to assess the people running the business. What kind of tips would you have for trying to assess management strengths and weaknesses?
That's a great point. That's a great question. So it makes it a lot easier. It's not bulletproof. If whoever runs the business owns a lot of stock. So that simplifies things a lot, tremendously. You look at their past decisions and see what what they did in the past, and you analyze that. Then you listen to them talk very carefully. If they keep talking about how they beat the estimates, or how they crushed the guidance, or whatever, those people are going to be short-term oriented. And this is important to understand. When you run a business, a lot of times there is a short-term and long-term are somewhat opposing to each other. In other words, long-term success a lot of times comes with investments that happen in short term. Okay, and the short-term investments mean that you will have lower earnings. You have lower earnings in the short run, but then as when they pay off, that's going to help the company. If you look at Amazon, right, that's what Amazon was able to do, right? They would grow revenues, they would take and generate cash flows, take all these cash flows and put it back into the business and basically not show profit. Okay, and Jeff Bezos said something that's been stuck with me, and actually as a CEO of this company, I think a lot about this. He said, when people congratulate me on a good quarter, guys, I say thank you because I'm trying to be polite, but in reality, what I did in this quarter had absolutely nothing to do with this quarter. This quarter has been decided for 3 years ago when we made investments that paid off in this quarter, right? And I think about this when we run this business because we can be doing a lot of things right, but there is a delay between our decisions and an outcome. And so that's probably, I'm kind of, again, going on a tangent, but going back to your question, Eric, I think, in other words, does the management own the business? Look at the past decision, look at what they say. And also look at the compensation, how they compensated, if compensated short-term or long-term.
You look for certain at the metrics they're being used as. So in other words, if you're want a high quality, high return type of business, are you looking to see if management is being compensated off earnings per share or off return on capital, those types of aspects?
You would look at how yes, you would look at the compensated earnings, cash flows, etc. Yeah, yes. Yeah.
So there were a couple questions kind of on that an article that you had written on your cell discipline, and I think you were talking a little bit about the short leash and the long leash. Yeah. So if you're on that company that you think has a high growth runway, has quality management and so forth, maybe an environment like this where they've really gotten run up, So yeah, you're letting it go, but when do you actually pull the trigger and start to sell those compounders because the multiple has just gotten
Yeah. Yeah, I think the there are two decisions when you sell. There are two decisions. It's a when so when you think about self discipline, you think about it as binary. You either own it, you don't. But it's in reality, it's not like that. I can be selling little at a time as the stock goes up, right? And so with the compounders, I'll be selling 10% position, 10% of the position over a period of time. And at some point you just run out of stocks to sell, basically. But you keep selling in small increments.
All right, so there's a couple of questions that I kind of put together from students that are really has to do with kind of the behavioral finance aspect of that EQ aspect that you're talking about in terms of like when do you actually sell a loser or reevaluate what you've done, and how difficult is that to kind of admit when you're wrong versus trying to stand against just the market not going your way. How do you go through maybe a process where you buy a company, you think you know it pretty well, and then the stock market isn't going with you, or something happens that you didn't expect?
So this company I mentioned, the British defense company that got into the flying rescue helicopters and planes and stuff. 3 months ago, they came out with 2 months ago, they came out with a press release saying, they had a new management. They came out with a press release saying we're not sure if the value of the contracts for the aerospace, for the plane business, if those contracts actually, if the count on these contracts was right, if the assumptions were right, suddenly 1/3 of the business, we have no idea what it's worth. Just overnight, I thought it's worth this much. And so what we went back to our models and say, okay, well, how much is the rest of the business worth? And figured out that the kind of the submarine business that's kind of been new, that hasn't changed. And based on that, is you guys still there?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Somebody I lost. Oh, here it is. Okay, got it. So we looked at the core business, and we realized that we're going to make less money. No, sure, for sure, if that business is worthless, but the company is still worth more on the rest, on the 70% of the business. And in that case, we basically decided we're going to do nothing for now, and then we'll see. So because we just that's all we had. We said because they said it may be worth less, and so anyway. So in other cases where we have in other cases we look at the business and we thought it was a certain quality and it's not, and then we say, well, can we use the money somewhere else? We sell it and buy something else. It's very difficult to give a prescription. It's kind of, we do one thing at a time, and it is probably the most painful part of investing, is that because you basically, when you sell a company that a stock has declined, you basically, by selling it, you're admitting a mistake. And I like to admit mistakes as much as everybody else. So but you learn to do this over time. You learn to do it over time and just move on. In fact, one thing I found is that, I have two companies that are we own 30 companies. We have two companies that are giving us kind of indigestion right now. One company I just talked about, and I don't remember a period of time where every single company did great. In fact, I'll tell you this: if I sell those two companies right now, those two companies give me indigestion, I'm sure somehow the other two will surface. For some reason, there's always one or two companies that are something not going right, but that's part of investing, right? That's why it's not a portfolio of, it's a portfolio of 20, 30 stocks, not a portfolio of 2 stocks. For me, Somebody else could be portfolio of 2 stocks.
Yeah, if you have 2 going bad out of 3, then you're really in trouble, right?
That's right.
One of our students wanted to know, what kind of things do you look for when you hire investment professionals, and what can they do while they're students to improve their attributes as value investors?
All right. So, Eric, after we're done, I'm going to send you a link. We created, like last year during the pandemic, I wanted to give something back to society. And I created this curriculum for you guys, for students like you guys, where I took all my best investment articles and some excerpts from my book and put them into kind of email curriculum. So you just go one at a time, So there I have this article that I wrote on that topic. And I think it's called The Letter to a Young Investor. And I basically was writing to myself 20-something years ago. So we, about 2 years ago, we went through a process of hiring an analyst for my firm. And so I had to think a lot of time, I spent a lot of time thinking, what am I looking for in that person? And somebody told me this saying by a famous basketball coach. He was approached about, kind of recruiting this player. And he said, and whoever was trying to teach him that player was saying how great he is. And then the basketball coach said, but you know what? You can't, you can't change. I'm butchering the quote because
can't coach height.
Yes, you can't coach height. Thank you. You can't coach height. And that is, to me, in investing is passion. I can teach you, especially if you came out of business school, I can tweak how you look at balance sheets or how you look at cash flows, all these things. Those things are teachable. If you don't have a passion for investing, I can't teach you that. Like, it's one of those things, either that fire is burning or it's not. If it's not burning, you should not be doing this, because you will be competing against people who are maniacs. Like a fellow that works for me, Brendan, he's the guy who I hired. He's reading 10K for breakfast. He receives joy from doing this. Try to compete against him. If you really don't find joy from doing this, you're gonna have a miserable life. You're gonna have a very miserable life. So I would say, don't go into investing or into anything for that matter, because you only live once after all, if you're not really passionate about it. Okay. And I know that there's some other gurus tell you don't do this. I would not want to live a life where I do something I don't enjoy. So, and Eric, what was the question? There was I'm kind of avoiding the question.
What can they do to improve themselves as value investors? What do you look for when you're hiring? And it sounds like, passion was what you were looking for, and then what they can do to improve their themselves.
Yeah, and so let me tell you how I hired. But how do you figure out if somebody has a passion? Let me tell you how. You set the walls very, very high for somebody to jump through before when they apply for a job. I intentionally made the process of getting hired very laborious. I forget all the things I did. I asked for a list of books you read last year and what you learned from them. I asked for people that had impact on your life. I forget how many people and why. I asked to give me a write-up of your past companies. It was a lengthy process. And somebody and we posted on LinkedIn, and somebody says, "So I'm gonna go through this. I'm gonna still not get a job. Why would I do that?" I'm like, that's exactly the point. If somebody wanted the job bad enough because they really have passion and they wanted to be here, then they would go through all this, through all this. I forget the numbers now, but I think we had maybe 50 applications. 35 of them did not include anything but resume. I did not even look at a single one of them. like honest to God, they did not exist for me. And then I forget, maybe 10 or 15 were actually did the work. And I think we ended up, I don't know, interviewing 5 or something. And when I hired Brandon, that was the easiest decision I ever made, just because everybody was here and he was right here. And that was, and the factor was just so easy to see. In his write-up, I could see he's very thoughtful. Actually, the 3 write-ups he sent me, I disagreed with a lot of his conclusions, but it didn't matter. I could see he was thoughtful about his write-ups. And I could see he had passion, and he was intelligent.
What? So this was from Christopher asked. Is there any common advice in the industry or from the academy that you strongly disagree with when we're talking about investments?
So I'm like, I have this dilemma right now, because I'm talking to students that go into school that have a curriculum, and I probably disagree with half of the curriculum. So do I just continue? Do I just say anything or not?
Yeah, because the next question is about the academy versus practical, and how do you rectify those? So we're going to get there. So you might as well talk about it. You're not going to offend me.
All right. So when I was a student, just like you, and I have a MS and I have undergraduate in finance and a MS in finance, I learned about modern portfolio theory. That was one of the most exciting days in my life. Honest to God, I was like, oh my God, you can do this, this, and this, and you got a modern frontier, and you can figure out how to stocks. That was so exciting. I honest to God, this, like, I'm not exaggerating. I was telling my friends about it, and they thought that I was crazy. And then, on the beta, the beauty of beta, how it's the risk, all these things, it marries these things together. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And then I got a real job, and I haven't used the word beta since. And I don't even know what if you are honest, and this is not exaggeration, if you ask me for beta of any companies I own, in fact, if you ask any value investor, anybody in my community, what is the beta of their stock, they would have no idea, because it's something that it kind of stays in academia. It's what it does. It stays in academia, or it stays with consultants, because consultants. So the problem is there is so much when you have a lot of computing power and you try to put what we do here into beautiful equations, you may still get a Nobel Prize for that, and Harry Markowitz, I think, did. But it's very precise, but it lacks common sense. Like let me just pick on a few, like beta. Like actually, I went on a small rant in my first book, Active Value Investing. So I think I showed the beta for Budweiser. And that beta was, when I forget the numbers now, from 0.6 to 1.2. Oh, no, for 1.2 to 0.6. And the only reason I did this because stock market declined and stock didn't. Did the Budweiser get less risky as a business? Just the things around it happened, the beta changed. So when I started doing it for a living, I realized that this beautiful, elegant capital asset pricing model, it works so well, but you have to make this assumption that people are rational. Let me just give you this example, and hopefully you'll be able to relate to this. Imagine you are working for Boeing, and you just took a physics class where they said the gravity does not exist. And they tell you, go build a plane if gravity doesn't exist. It makes no sense, right? Because the gravity, and that's what kind of, when the capital asset pricing model says people are rational, then it's basically saying that gravity does not exist. And so you're trying to build a plane, assuming there is no gravity. I would not want to be on that plane. So that's my rant of the day for about what I wish my kids would never learn.
Daniel Roach has one that's a little more philosophical.
Love
He
it.
talks about in one of your articles, you quote Warren Buffett when he said, as an investor, you get something out of all the deadly sins except envy. And you went on to kind of explain how investors, you have a lot of power to get rid of your suffering by not wanting the wrong thing. So as students and professionals early in their career, what kind of virtues should they be trying to internalize to get the most benefit from their career? Career advice, life advice type question.
Wow. Thank you, Dan. I appreciate that question. So what, well, so I think in an article I was doing, I think, is that the article where I talk about coveting your neighbor's wife? Was that the article?
He didn't give me the title of it, but I think that was.
Yeah, no, I think that was it. So in that article, I basically talk about, and then we'll kind of get to your question. I talked about how I was talking to a friend of mine, and I forget how the conversation came about. But I asked him, "Would you want Warren Buffett's success?" And he's a value investor just like me, and he was completely stunned by the question. He's like, "Is that a rhetorical?" He asked me, "Is that a rhetorical question?" I said, "Absolutely not. Would you want Warren Buffett's success?" He's like, "Absolutely." I said, "But here's the thing, though." And this is like my wife told me. There's this Jewish wisdom. If you want somebody's success, if you covet something, like in your neighbor's wife, for instance, which is one of the commandments in it, that says don't. Covet away, but do it in the entirety. Okay, and this is, think about it. So when we are envious of something, we only see a part of it. We only, but if you see the whole picture, you may say, actually, I may not want that. I may be happy with what I got. So if you look at Warren Buffett's success, obviously, incredibly successful person, but that's the asset side of the balance sheet. But look at the liabilities the costs he had to incur to get there. His wife that he loved dearly left him. His kids basically felt like his father did not pay attention to them. When I read Alice Schroeder's Snowball, the only thing I remember getting out of that book about Warren Buffett was, I don't want to be as a father like Warren Buffett. And I'm so lucky I read it when it came out, that I was able to change my behavior, and actually did change my behavior, and started. It's so much, as an investor, it's so much easier for me to just be in my kind of natural environment of reading, building spreadsheets, etc. It's so easy for me to work all the time, But what I do, what I do to myself, I force myself to spend time with kids. By the way, this sounds like I don't want to spend time with my kids. That's not the point. Actually, I do, but it's not. I have to interrupt something that's flowing, and get into another flow that I'm going to enjoy once it starts flowing. So I have to go from one environment to another, and I have to force that. So whenever you look at somebody's success, or you look at or you look at your neighbor's wife, just remember that you see the beauty on the outside, but but you're only seeing part of the picture. And once you get to know this person, is all the other things that come with it, you say, actually, no, maybe she's not for me. And this happens all the time. So I'm basically what I learned, I don't want to make regrettable mistakes, I guess. And for me, and you guys, a lot of you are too young for this, some of you are not anymore. when your kids being young only happens once. And for me was the mistake, the lesson was that I want to make sure that I'm there when they're growing up, so I don't have that regret. Anyway, so that's not, I know that's not where I don't know, Dan, if I kind of answered your question, but that's probably one of the biggest takeaways. By the way, there's so many things, positive things we can learn from Warren Buffett, and I talk about those things in an article. But one thing is that I really respect is that you want to have your internal scorecard. You basically want to make sure that you are not trying to, your happiness or unhappiness is not determined by what other people think of you. Okay, so at the end of this speech today, I hope that I have impacted you in a positive way, and I'll try very hard to do this, but that's all I can do, right? So I just so the way I judge myself, I should be happy with what I told you. If you're gonna like it or not, I have no control over that. And there are a lot of things in life like that. The worst thing you can do is try to, and this is why the social media is so poisonous, because you basically look for constant likes and from strangers, right? And your self-worth is basically dependent on things you can't really control. You write and as a writer, actually, I kind of, it's kind of the interesting part was this. The best article I wrote last year was, look it up on my website, called Art or Craft. And I felt this is the best, most insightful article to me I wrote. I had no response on the article. Nobody cared. And you know what? I'm like, okay, they didn't care, but I care. And that's, I cared and I learned from it. And anyway, so this is what I learned from Buffett. One of the things I learned from Buffett, I guess. So,
yeah. Well, Vitaliy, I know we're getting late here, so in the time that we asked for, but I do have a question. IU is the home to the Jacobs School of Music, which is one of the top music schools in the country, and we actually have a student who was at the Jacobs Schools, Caleb Cranton, and he noticed your love for classical music when he was reading some of your articles, and wanted just to ask you, what draws you in about classical music and makes you want to learn about that? When did you realize you loved classical music? And I thought I'd kind of end the question on something that was of real importance to you, and and so I'll just let you answer that for a moment.
So my parents listened to classical. My mom played piano and violin. I think she actually was a very good violinist. So we listened. My parents listened to classical music at home, and I think that's how I was introduced to that. And as I got older in life, it's almost like the other music did not have enough emotion for me. And the complexity of the thing about classical music, and I'm generalizing right now, right? It usually has a lot more layers of complexity, and you can listen to the same piece many, many times, and every single time you uncover a new layer. And also, music has this kind of unearths. As you can probably see, I'm a fairly emotional person, and and then what music does, it's actually unearths even more emotions, and it's really just changes how I feel. It just makes me feel good. It's really that simple. And when I write, I put my headphones on, and this is when I listen most of my music, just in the morning when I write or when I go for a walk. And that's inadvertent, and then what happened, actually, this is kind of interesting. I told you guys how writing had a huge impact on me in my life. One of the things that happened also, this has happened maybe 10 years ago. I wrote an article, and I was listening to something at the time, And that piece had a huge impact on me. And I threw a link to YouTube link at the bottom of the article. I say, and by the way, here is the piece by whatever. And that was it. And then that started a tradition where I started to attach music at the bottom of my articles. But the problem is, it's in addition to attention to this music, I started to research it more. And I started to read about classical music composers, conductors. I started to watch a lot of videos about them. And that process, by me writing about it, made me read more about it, which meant I wrote more about it. And that basically, in fact, I have a website, myfavoriteclassical.com. If you want to learn about classical music, just go there, and there's a lot of articles about classical music. But I find that classical music has just made my life. It's almost like it added salt, like in a good, like when you add salt to a meal, it brings out taste. It did that to my life. It just made my life taste better, I guess. That's the analogy again. So.
Well, that's great. So, Vitaliy, I just want to thank you for your time today. If you ever decide you want to, is it your son that has a friend here on campus? If you ever want to come with your son, let us know, and we'll try to get you over to the Jacob School and then over to the Kelly School to speak to some more students. But really appreciate you taking the time today and speaking with our class.
Eric, thank you so much. And guys, great questions. I really enjoyed I assume, I guess, is better than nothing, but obviously when you have a real experience, it's so much better. But it's great to be here, and I really enjoyed the questions, and thank you for inviting me, I guess. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. This and other investment articles by Vitaliy Katsenelson are based on value investing principles that were first brought down from the mountain by Benjamin Graham and later were popularized by Warren Buffett. To learn more about these principles, visit investor.fm and listen to the first episode of this podcast, titled The 6 Commandments of Value Investing. To learn more about how Vitaliy's investment firm uses these principles to create low-risk, long-term oriented portfolios, visit imausa.com. Enjoy life and prosper.